The fastest way to reveal someone's character is to give them a microphone and an audience. The crystal chandeliers scattered warm golden light across the grand ballroom as nearly 300 guests filled the elegant reception with laughter, conversation, and the soft melody of a live string quartet. Every table shimmered beneath polished silverware, white roses, and flickering candles that reflected across the marble floor like tiny stars. It was the kind of wedding people would remember for years, not because of its luxury, but because of what was about to happen. Emily Carter stood confidently at the center of the room in a custom ivory wedding gown, smiling as photographers circled the newly married couple. Beside her, Marcus Brooks looked proud but quietly overwhelmed by the extravagant celebration organized almost entirely by the Carter family. He had never cared much for expensive receptions or lavish decorations. The only thing that truly mattered to him was seeing the people he loved together under one roof. Seated quietly near the back of the ballroom was his mother, Gloria Brooks. She wore a simple navy blue dress with a small silver brooch that had belonged to her late husband for more than 30 years. Nothing about her appearance demanded attention. She greeted every server with genuine kindness, thanked the young pianist after each performance, and smiled warmly whenever another guest happened to glance her way. Most people assumed she was simply another quiet relative. None of them knew that Gloria had spent decades living a life that never sought recognition. As the evening continued, the master of ceremonies invited immediate family members to prepare for the official wedding portraits that would be displayed in the family's keepsake album for generations. Cameras were adjusted. Lighting was tested. Guests slowly turned toward the beautifully decorated stage where fresh flowers framed a magnificent white backdrop. Emily accepted the wireless microphone with effortless confidence. Her voice carried clearly through every corner of the ballroom. "Before we begin our family photographs," she announced with a graceful smile, "I would like to ask that only immediate family members who truly represent our family's image join us at the front." A few guests exchanged puzzled glances, uncertain why such an unusual statement had been made. Emily paused for only a moment before slowly turning her eyes toward the back of the room. Her smile never disappeared. "Mrs. Brooks," she continued politely enough that the words almost sounded kind, "perhaps you would feel more comfortable remaining with the other guests instead of joining the family portraits." The music stopped almost instantly. Even the photographers lowered their cameras. An uncomfortable silence settled across the ballroom, so completely that the soft hum of the air conditioning suddenly became noticeable. Marcus stared at Emily, convinced he had misunderstood what she had just said. Around the room, several members of the Carter family quietly lowered their eyes, while others watched Gloria with open curiosity. Richard Carter remained standing near the stage with folded arms, saying nothing, yet offering no sign that he intended to stop what had just happened. Gloria slowly lifted her eyes toward her son. There was surprise in them, and a hint of sadness, but neither anger nor resentment. She gently placed her folded napkin beside her untouched glass of iced tea before rising with calm dignity. Every movement was unhurried. Every expression remained peaceful. Marcus instinctively took one step toward her, but Gloria met his eyes and gave the smallest shake of her head. It was the same reassuring gesture she had used throughout his childhood whenever life became difficult. Without speaking another word, she quietly reached for her small handbag, preparing to protect her son's happiest day, even if it meant walking away from it herself. Marcus felt his chest tighten, but the gentle movement of his mother's head stopped him before he could take another step. He knew that look better than anyone. It was the same quiet expression she had worn years earlier when the electricity had been shut off in their small apartment. Yet she still smiled by candlelight and read him bedtime stories as though nothing in the world had gone wrong. It was the same expression she had worn after finishing exhausting overnight shifts at the county hospital before attending every school concert, every baseball game, and every parent conference without ever mentioning how tired she truly was. Gloria had spent her entire life making certain that difficult moments ended with someone else feeling stronger than she did. She refused to let this evening become different. Slowly, she smoothed the sleeve of her navy dress and offered Emily a gentle smile that carried neither bitterness nor embarrassment. "If my stepping away helps everyone enjoy this celebration," she said softly, "then I will gladly do that. Today belongs to you and Marcus." Her calm voice echoed through the ballroom more powerfully than anger ever could. Several guests quietly lowered their eyes. Others shifted uncomfortably in their chairs, sensing that something deeply unfair had just unfolded before them. Marcus opened his mouth to speak, but Gloria looked at him once more with quiet reassurance. She wanted him to remember that his wedding day should never become a battlefield because of her. Richard Carter remained near the stage, saying nothing as he adjusted the cuff of his tailored jacket. His silence spoke loudly enough. Years of business success had convinced him that appearances protected family prestige, and he believed difficult decisions were sometimes necessary to preserve it. Emily had grown up accepting that philosophy without ever questioning it. She had learned how to recognize expensive brands before she learned how to recognize quiet sacrifice. Looking at Gloria's modest dress, she saw only simplicity instead of strength. Looking at her calm smile, she saw ordinary kindness instead of extraordinary character. Gloria reached for the small handbag resting beside her chair. Before leaving, she paused beside a young server who had accidentally dropped a folded napkin while clearing the nearby table. Gloria bent down, picked it up, and handed it back with a warm smile. "You are doing a wonderful job tonight," she told him kindly. The young man blinked in surprise before thanking her. No guest had spoken to him that warmly all evening. Gloria then thanked the pianist for the beautiful music as she passed the stage, even though the performance had been interrupted. The elderly musician smiled with genuine appreciation, touched that someone had noticed him during such an uncomfortable moment. Marcus watched every step his mother took across the polished marble floor. Memories flooded his mind with painful clarity. He remembered her working extra shifts so he could attend college without crushing debt. He remembered her sewing loose buttons back onto his only interview suit late at night after returning home from the hospital. He remembered her repeating one lesson more often than any other. People will always remember how you made them feel long after they forget what you owned. At the time, he thought those words were simply good advice. Standing in the ballroom now, he finally realized they were the foundation upon which she had built her entire life. As Gloria reached the grand entrance, she paused for one last glance toward her son. Her eyes held pride, encouragement, and unconditional love. Then she quietly stepped through the ballroom doors into the cool evening air, leaving behind the brightest room in the building while carrying within herself a light no humiliation could ever diminish. The ballroom doors closed gently behind Gloria, and the cheerful music instantly became little more than a distant echo. Outside, the evening felt calm, almost untouched by the painful moment that had just unfolded inside. A cool breeze carried the scent of freshly trimmed flowers through the circular driveway, while rows of elegant lanterns cast long ribbons of golden light across the polished stone walkway. Gloria stood quietly beneath the hotel entrance canopy for a moment before taking a slow breath. She adjusted the silver brooch on her dress, not because anyone was watching, but because it reminded her of her late husband, who had always told her that grace mattered most when life became difficult. A young valet noticed her standing alone and approached with a respectful smile. "Ma'am, would you like me to call a taxi for you?" he asked politely. Gloria returned his smile with genuine warmth. "Thank you, but I think I will enjoy the evening air for a little while." The young man nodded and quietly stepped back, somehow sensing that she needed peace more than transportation. Gloria slowly walked toward a stone bench overlooking the beautifully landscaped gardens surrounding the hotel. Small fountains shimmered beneath soft lights while guests inside continued celebrating, unaware that one quiet decision had already changed the meaning of the evening forever. She sat down carefully and opened her handbag. Inside rested a worn family photograph protected by a clear plastic sleeve. The picture had been taken more than 20 years earlier on Marcus's first day of kindergarten. His father stood proudly beside them, his arm wrapped around Gloria's shoulder, while little Marcus smiled with the fearless confidence only children possess. Gloria gently traced the edge of the photograph with one finger before smiling to herself. "He would have been so proud of you today," she whispered almost silently, speaking to the memory of the man she still missed every day. Inside the ballroom, however, the celebration struggled to recover its earlier excitement. Guests attempted to resume conversations, but the atmosphere had changed. Laughter sounded forced. The music no longer carried the same joy. Several people quietly glanced toward the ballroom entrance, wondering whether someone should have followed Gloria outside. Marcus remained standing near the stage while photographers waited awkwardly for instructions. Every instinct told him to leave everything behind and find his mother, yet he remained frozen between responsibility and heartbreak. Emily noticed the pain in his expression but convinced herself that time would smooth over the uncomfortable moment. Richard Carter quietly reminded several family members that the reception schedule should continue without interruption. To him, maintaining appearances remained the priority. Yet even he could not ignore the growing uneasiness spreading throughout the room. Outside, Gloria closed the photograph and carefully returned it to her handbag. She folded her hands together and watched the evening sky slowly darken above the hotel entrance. There was sadness in her eyes, but there was also peace. She had spent decades learning that dignity did not depend upon acceptance from strangers. It came from remaining faithful to the values no disappointment could erase. A soft breeze gently lifted a few strands of her silver hair as headlights suddenly appeared beyond the wrought iron gates leading into the property. At first, Gloria paid little attention. She assumed another wedding guest had arrived late. But the hotel security staff immediately straightened their posture. Valets exchanged curious glances. One after another, 3 elegant silhouettes slowly emerged from the darkness, their polished black exteriors reflecting the entrance lights with unmistakable distinction. Without realizing it, every person standing outside instinctively turned toward the approaching vehicles, unaware that the quiet evening was only seconds away from revealing a truth that would change every heart inside the ballroom. The 3 luxury automobiles moved with quiet precision, their engines barely louder than the evening breeze as they followed the curved driveway toward the hotel entrance. The polished black paint reflected the warm lights hanging beneath the entrance canopy, creating shimmering ribbons of gold across every smooth surface. One valet quietly whispered to another, unable to hide his surprise. The hotel regularly welcomed successful business leaders and public figures, yet even he recognized that visitors arriving together in such distinguished fashion rarely appeared without important purpose. Gloria remained seated on the stone bench, her hands resting gently upon her handbag. She glanced toward the approaching vehicles with calm curiosity rather than excitement. Whatever was happening, she showed no desire to become the center of attention. The first automobile came to a graceful stop, followed a few seconds later by the second, then the third. The timing felt unhurried, almost respectful. Uniformed chauffeurs stepped out one after another before carefully opening the rear passenger doors. Inside the ballroom, several guests standing near the tall glass windows noticed the unusual arrival. Their conversations gradually faded as more people drifted toward the entrance, trying to see who had unexpectedly interrupted the evening. Even the photographers lowered their cameras from the stage and instinctively turned toward the lobby. Marcus noticed the growing movement almost immediately. Looking past the ballroom doors, he caught sight of the unfamiliar vehicles waiting outside. Something inside him urged him to move. Ignoring the confused voices around him, he quietly stepped away from the stage and began walking toward the hotel entrance. Emily watched him leave, uncertainty replacing the confidence she had displayed only minutes earlier. Richard Carter frowned slightly, irritated that another distraction had begun drawing attention away from the carefully planned reception. Outside, the first passenger stepped onto the stone walkway. She was an elegant woman in her early 60s dressed in a beautifully tailored navy suit, carrying herself with quiet confidence rather than display. Behind her emerged a distinguished heart surgeon known throughout the state, followed by the founder of a nationally respected technology company whose charitable foundation had funded thousands of educational scholarships. From the third automobile stepped a federal judge and a retired military officer whose calm presence reflected decades of service rather than authority. None of them paused to admire the grand hotel or acknowledge the gathering crowd. Their eyes searched for only one person. When the elegant woman finally saw Gloria sitting peacefully beneath the entrance lights, her face softened into a warm smile filled with unmistakable affection. She walked forward without hesitation. The others quietly followed several respectful steps behind her. Gloria slowly stood, her expression changing from gentle curiosity to sincere recognition. "You came all this way," she said softly, almost as though greeting old friends after many years apart. The elegant woman smiled even more warmly before opening her arms. "We heard someone forgot who you really are," she replied. "We could never let you stand here alone." At that exact moment, Marcus pushed through the revolving doors and stopped in complete silence. He watched the distinguished visitors surround his mother with genuine warmth, not because of her social status or financial success, but because of something far greater. Behind him, more wedding guests gathered near the entrance, followed moments later by Emily and Richard. None of them understood why accomplished people from such different walks of life had all arrived together for one quiet woman wearing a simple navy dress. But every face carried the same question. Who was Gloria Brooks? And why did every person stepping out of those remarkable automobiles look at her with the respect usually reserved for someone truly unforgettable? Marcus remained frozen near the revolving doors as the distinguished visitors gathered around his mother with the warmth of family rather than the formality of strangers. The elegant woman embraced Gloria first, smiling through eyes that reflected years of gratitude. "You still disappear whenever people try to thank you," she said with gentle laughter. Gloria smiled modestly. "I have always believed that the work matters more than the recognition." The heart surgeon stepped forward next, shaking his head with quiet admiration. "You worked countless overnight shifts at the county hospital so the emergency scholarship fund would never run out," he said. "I was 19 years old when I received my first tuition payment from that fund. You never allowed anyone to tell me who made it possible. I only learned the truth years later." Gloria looked almost embarrassed by the praise. "You became a wonderful doctor because of your own determination," she replied softly. "I simply opened a door." Before another word could be spoken, the technology company founder smiled warmly and added, "She opened the first door for me as well. I had been living in my car after losing both of my parents. Mrs. Brooks found me volunteering at a community kitchen, convinced me to return to school, and quietly paid for my first semester without ever asking for recognition." The retired military officer nodded respectfully. "When I returned home after my service, I believed my future had ended. She introduced me to counselors, employers, and people who reminded me that hope still existed." The federal judge smiled as she looked toward Gloria. "She attended my law school graduation, but she refused to sit with the honored guests because she believed my grandmother deserved that seat instead. That is the kind of woman standing before you." Each story settled over the gathering crowd like another gentle wave. More wedding guests quietly stepped outside, no longer curious about the luxury automobiles, but completely absorbed by the lives unfolding through these heartfelt memories. Emily listened without speaking. Every sentence quietly dismantled the assumptions she had built over many years. She had believed that influence announced itself through expensive clothing, prestigious addresses, and family reputation. Yet the woman she had dismissed only minutes earlier had transformed lives without asking anyone to remember her name. Richard Carter slowly removed his hands from his pockets, his confident posture beginning to soften. For the first time that evening, he found himself looking beyond Gloria's modest appearance. He saw the calm expression of someone who had measured success by people instead of possessions. Marcus finally walked toward his mother, his eyes glistening with emotion. "Mom," he whispered, struggling to steady his voice. "Why did you never tell me any of this?" Gloria looked at her son with the same gentle affection she had shown throughout his entire life. "Because kindness is not something you collect applause for," she answered quietly. "If someone leaves your life stronger than when you found them, that is already enough." The evening air grew wonderfully still. Even the hotel staff remained motionless, listening as though every word carried a lesson worth remembering. The elegant woman looked toward the growing crowd and smiled. "Do you know why all three of us came tonight?" she asked. Before anyone could answer, she continued, "Because every person standing here received the same phone call. Someone told us that the woman who changed our lives was standing alone outside her own son's wedding. None of us could allow that to happen." A deep silence settled across the entrance. It was no longer the silence of embarrassment. It had become the silence that follows the discovery of a truth powerful enough to change every heart that hears it. The evening seemed to slow until even time itself felt reluctant to move forward. The conversations that had filled the hotel entrance only moments before gradually disappeared, replaced by a peaceful silence broken only by the gentle sound of the nearby fountain and the distant notes of the string quartet still playing inside the ballroom. Soft golden light spilled through the tall glass doors, meeting the cool blue shades of the evening sky, where Gloria stood quietly surrounded by people whose lives she had changed without ever asking to be remembered. She looked from one grateful face to another with the same humble smile she had worn throughout the entire evening. There was no pride in her eyes, no satisfaction that the truth had finally been revealed. Instead, she seemed almost uncomfortable receiving attention that she believed belonged to everyone else. The heart surgeon smiled warmly. "Mrs. Brooks, every child who walks through my hospital today is touched by your kindness, even if they never know your name." Gloria gently shook her head. "They are touched by doctors who chose to dedicate their lives to healing others. I only believed in someone before the rest of the world did." The federal judge quietly nodded. "That is exactly why we came. You always speak about what others accomplish, but never about what you sacrificed." Gloria lowered her eyes for a brief moment before looking toward the evening sky. A soft breeze gently moved a few silver strands of her hair. "Every parent sacrifices something," she answered peacefully. "Every teacher does. Every nurse does. Every person who truly loves someone understands that giving without expecting anything in return is never a burden." Marcus listened in complete silence. Memories that once seemed ordinary suddenly carried extraordinary meaning. He remembered finding his mother asleep at the kitchen table after working long hospital shifts, her reading glasses still resting beside stacks of scholarship applications she had reviewed late into the night. He remembered weekends spent delivering meals to elderly neighbors because she believed loneliness deserved as much attention as hunger. He remembered birthdays when she insisted simple celebrations created the happiest memories because love never depended on expensive gifts. As each memory returned, Marcus realized he had spent his entire life witnessing greatness without recognizing it. Emily remained several steps behind him, her hands quietly folded together. She noticed details she had overlooked before. The carefully repaired stitching along Gloria's sleeve. The comfortable shoes chosen for practicality instead of fashion. The old handbag that had clearly been used for many years. Nothing Gloria carried suggested wealth, yet everything about her reflected quiet purpose. Emily suddenly understood that she had confused simplicity with insignificance, and the realization settled heavily inside her heart. Richard Carter stood motionless beneath the entrance lights, watching respected leaders speak about Gloria with admiration that no business award or social status could ever purchase. For decades, he had measured achievement through financial success, influence, and recognition. Tonight, those measurements no longer seemed complete. The young valet who had first offered Gloria a taxi quietly smiled as he watched strangers thank her with genuine affection. A waitress standing nearby gently wiped away a tear before returning to her duties. No one seemed interested in the 3 luxury automobiles anymore. They had become little more than silent witnesses. The true miracle unfolding that evening had never been about expensive vehicles or distinguished guests. It was about discovering that the quietest person in the room had built the richest legacy of all, one act of kindness at a time, until countless grateful lives became the greatest testimony anyone could ever leave behind. Emily could no longer remain where she was. Every story she had just heard echoed against the words she had spoken inside the ballroom only minutes earlier, and each memory shared by the grateful visitors quietly dismantled another piece of the certainty she had carried throughout her life. She slowly stepped forward until only a few feet separated her from Gloria. The elegant evening lights reflected softly against the marble entrance, but they could not hide the emotion growing in her eyes. For the first time that day, she looked beyond the simple navy dress, beyond the modest handbag, beyond every assumption she had made. She finally saw the woman who had spent decades changing lives without asking anyone to remember her name. Richard Carter followed several steps behind his daughter. The confidence that had defined his business career seemed to fade beneath the weight of a truth he could no longer ignore. The technology entrepreneur turned toward him with a respectful smile. "Mr. Carter, we have crossed paths many times at charity events," he said calmly. "You know my company. What you did not know is that none of it would exist without Mrs. Brooks. She believed in me before I had a resume, before I had investors, before I even believed in myself." Richard remained silent. Before he could respond, the federal judge added gently, Every achievement people celebrate in my career began with one anonymous scholarship. I spent years searching for the person who made it possible. When I finally found Mrs. Brooks, she asked me for only one favor. She told me to help someone else when my time came. The heart surgeon smiled warmly. She gave every one of us the same lesson. Success means very little if it only changes your own life. Those words settled deeply into Richard's heart. He had spent decades building companies, negotiating contracts, and measuring accomplishment through numbers. Standing before Gloria, he suddenly realized there was another kind of wealth that never appeared on financial statements. It lived quietly inside grateful people whose futures had been transformed by compassion. Emily slowly lifted her eyes toward Gloria. Her voice trembled with sincerity. "Mrs. Brooks," she whispered, "I thought I understood what made a family respected. Tonight, I learned that I never understood it at all." Gloria met her eyes with gentle kindness, offering neither judgment nor satisfaction. Emily continued, struggling to steady her emotions. "I looked at your appearance instead of your character. I noticed what you wore instead of what you carried inside your heart. I believed reputation came from status, when it actually comes from the way people remember being treated." Marcus stood quietly beside his mother, listening as the woman he loved confronted the painful truth of her own choices. He reached for Gloria's hand, and she gently squeezed his fingers with the same reassuring warmth she had offered since he was a little boy. "Mom," he said softly, "everything good in my life started with you." Gloria smiled tenderly. "Everything good in your life started the day you chose kindness over pride," she answered. The distinguished visitors exchanged knowing smiles, recognizing those familiar words. They had all heard some version of the same lesson years before. Around them, wedding guests remained completely silent. Even the hotel employees paused in respectful stillness. It no longer mattered who had arrived in expensive automobiles or who possessed influence and success. The only thing anyone could see now was a quiet black mother whose greatest achievement had never been the remarkable people standing beside her. It had been the goodness she had planted inside them long before the rest of the world ever learned their names. Emily slowly stepped closer until she stood directly before Gloria, no longer separated by status, assumptions, or the expectations that had shaped her entire life. The cool evening air seemed to carry away the pride she had worn so confidently only an hour earlier. She looked into Gloria's gentle eyes and realized that the woman standing before her had every reason to walk away forever, yet there was not the slightest trace of resentment in her expression. Emily took a slow breath before speaking. "Mrs. Brooks," she said softly, her voice trembling with genuine regret, "I cannot erase what I said tonight, and I cannot pretend those words did not hurt you. I judged you before I knew you. I measured your worth by appearances instead of your character, and I am deeply ashamed of that." Tears slowly gathered in her eyes as the silence around them grew even more profound. Richard Carter stepped forward beside his daughter, removing the confidence he had always carried like a shield. For the first time in many years, he spoke without the certainty that usually defined every business negotiation. "Mrs. Brooks," he said quietly, "I spent my life teaching my daughter that reputation was everything. Tonight you reminded both of us that reputation built on appearances is fragile, but character built through kindness lasts forever. I owe you an apology that should never have been necessary." Gloria listened patiently before offering both of them the same warm smile she had offered strangers throughout her entire life. She gently reached out and placed one hand over Emily's trembling hands. "We all see the world through lessons someone else taught us," she answered peacefully. "The important part is having the courage to learn a better lesson when life gives you the opportunity." Emily lowered her head, overcome by emotion. Marcus watched the exchange with quiet gratitude, feeling years of his mother's wisdom unfolding before him in a way he had never fully understood until this moment. Gloria then looked toward Richard with calm sincerity. "Every family leaves something behind for the next generation," she continued. "Some leave wealth, some leave success. I only hope this family leaves compassion, because that is the inheritance that never loses its value." Richard slowly nodded, unable to hide the emotion filling his eyes. Around them, the distinguished guests smiled with quiet approval, recognizing once again the extraordinary grace that had shaped so many of their own lives. The elegant woman who had arrived in the first automobile gently whispered, That is exactly why we all came. She never teaches through anger. She teaches through mercy. The surrounding wedding guests remained completely silent, each person reflecting on moments in their own lives when they had judged someone too quickly. Even the hotel staff paused respectfully, sensing they were witnessing something far more meaningful than an apology. Emily finally lifted her head and looked toward the ballroom entrance. "Mrs. Brooks," she said, "if you are willing, would you please come back inside with us? Not because everyone now knows what you have done, but because I finally understand who you have always been. I cannot begin this marriage while leaving the heart of our family standing outside." Gloria smiled gently and squeezed Emily's hands one last time. "Then let us go inside together," she replied softly. "A wedding should begin with love, not with regret." Side by side, Gloria, Marcus, Emily, and Richard walked toward the glowing ballroom doors while the distinguished visitors quietly followed behind them, not as honored guests seeking attention, but as grateful people accompanying the woman who had taught them that forgiveness is the strongest form of dignity a person can ever possess. As the ballroom doors opened once again, the warm glow of crystal chandeliers spilled across the marble entrance like welcoming sunlight after a passing storm. The music, which had quietly continued in the background, gradually softened as every guest turned toward the returning group. This time no one noticed the distinguished visitors walking behind them. Every eye rested on Gloria. She entered exactly as she had left, wearing the same simple navy dress, carrying the same well-worn handbag, and wearing the same gentle smile. Nothing about her appearance had changed. The only thing that had changed was the way everyone now chose to see her. Without a single announcement, guests slowly rose from their seats one by one. The movement spread naturally across the ballroom until every person stood in respectful silence. There was no dramatic applause, no celebration seeking attention, only quiet appreciation filling the room more deeply than any speech ever could. Emily walked beside Gloria and gently guided her toward the family table. This time she personally pulled out the chair before speaking softly enough for those nearby to hear. "Mrs. Brooks, I hope you will allow us the honor of having you sit where you have always belonged." Gloria smiled kindly before taking her seat. "Thank you," she answered. "But remember that every seat becomes an honorable place whenever people choose kindness over pride." Marcus sat beside his mother, feeling a peace he had never experienced before. Looking around the room, he realized that nothing about the elegant decorations had made the evening unforgettable. It had been transformed by a single act of humility and a single decision to forgive. Richard Carter quietly walked to the master of ceremonies and requested one small change to the evening schedule. The official family photographs would begin again from the beginning. The photographer carefully adjusted the lights while everyone gathered near the floral backdrop once more. This time no one discussed where each person should stand. Without instruction, Emily and Marcus naturally positioned Gloria between them. Richard joined them on one side, his expression no longer defined by social expectation, but by sincere respect. As the photographer prepared the camera, he smiled and suggested everyone move a little closer together. They did. Marcus gently held his mother's hand. Emily rested one hand upon Gloria's shoulder. Richard stood quietly beside them with humble gratitude. The camera captured far more than smiling faces. It preserved forgiveness, understanding, and the beginning of a different kind of family legacy. After the photographs, the distinguished visitors quietly prepared to leave. One after another they embraced Gloria, thanking her once more before returning to the waiting automobiles outside. They departed as quietly as they had arrived, never asking to be introduced or recognized. Their purpose had already been fulfilled. As the reception continued, Gloria did what she had always done. She thanked the servers for their hard work, complimented the musicians for their beautiful performance, encouraged the young valet who hoped to become an engineer, and wished every guest a safe journey home. Long after the final dance had ended and the ballroom lights slowly dimmed, one image remained in Marcus's heart above every expensive decoration and every carefully planned detail. It was the sight of his mother walking back into the room with grace instead of resentment, proving without raising her voice that true honor is never created by wealth, appearance, or status. It is quietly earned through a lifetime of kindness, and once it lives inside the hearts of others, no prejudice can ever take it away.